In 1828 Edinburgh, a cheap bed could hide a horrifying calculation. To the wrong people, your body might be worth more dead than alive. The danger did not begin with a knife in an alley. It could begin with a warm room, a friendly voice, and an offer to stay the night. Edinburgh was already famous for medical teaching, especially anatomy. Students needed bodies to learn from, and the legal supply was painfully small. For years, that shortage supported an illicit trade in freshly buried corpses. So-called resurrection meant open graves and sold bodies to anatomy teachers. Families fought back. Graveyards were watched, and iron devices such as morgue safes were used to protect new burials from being disturbed. As bodies became harder to steal, the market did not disappear. It became more dangerous because the demand for cadavers remained. The story that became the Westport murders began with a death that was not a murder. In November 1827, a lodger in Hare's household died naturally while owing rent. William Hare and William Burke sold that body to the anatomy trade. The transaction showed them that a corpse could produce immediate cash. What followed in 1828 was something far worse. Historical accounts connect Burke and Hare to at least 16 victims over the 1827 to 1828 period. Now imagine you are not one of the famous names in the case. You are simply a tired traveler arriving in Edinburgh with little money and no strong local network. The Westport area is crowded, noisy, damp, and full of working people. A stranger offering inexpensive lodging does not automatically look suspicious. That is the first survival problem. The threat is disguised as normal social help. You need a bed, and someone appears to solve the problem. You step inside a narrow close and climb a cramped stair. The city is still nearby, but the room you enter is already more private than the street. A door closes. Your choices have not vanished, but the environment is no longer yours. The host knows the exits, the neighbors, and the rhythm of the house. The historical record says potential victims were often lured with offers of accommodation and then given drink until they were deeply impaired or unconscious. Alcohol matters because it changes the survival equation before any physical attack begins. Judgment slows, balance worsens, and your ability to read danger narrows. The room may still feel ordinary. Rough timber, a small fire, cheap cups, worn bedding. Nothing announces that you have entered a murder scene. That ordinariness is exactly what makes the situation dangerous. A visible weapon would trigger fear. Hospitality asks you to lower your guard voluntarily. Burke and Hare became notorious for suffocating victims in ways intended to avoid obvious wounds. The body could then enter the anatomy trade without signs of a violent struggle being immediately visible. For a potential victim, that means waiting for unmistakable violence is already waiting too long. Survival depends on noticing changes in control, not just signs of injury. Ask the practical questions early. Do you know how to leave? Are your coat, shoes, money, and bundle still within reach? Can you get back to the street without permission? One warning sign alone proves nothing, but several small losses of control can add up. More drink, a closed room, unfamiliar people arriving, your belongings moved away. The critical moment is not a dramatic fight. It is the quiet moment when you decide whether politeness matters more than your ability to walk out. In a city without modern phones, identity records, or instant emergency help, disappearing from a cheap lodging house could be frighteningly easy if nobody expected you elsewhere. That vulnerability was not distributed equally. Historical accounts show that many of Burke and Hare's victims were poor, socially exposed, or otherwise easier to isolate. Most were poor local women, though the victims also included men. Poverty itself did not cause the murders, but it reduced the protection that money, status, and networks could provide. The famous case of James Wilson, known locally as Daft Jamie, also shows the risk of assuming that only unknown travelers could be targeted. He was recognizable in Edinburgh, so the survival rule cannot simply be avoid strangers. The deeper rule is to protect your independence when someone else controls the room, the drink, and the terms. If you are exhausted, hungry, cold, or embarrassed about having little money, you are more likely to accept a solution quickly. Those pressures are part of the trap. A safer choice is not perfect foresight. It is keeping options open, remain in public longer, choose a lodging with visible activity, tell someone where you are going, and limit how impaired you become. In 1828, none of those choices guaranteed safety. But every layer of visibility makes it harder for another person to turn you into someone who can vanish quietly. The geography made the case even more disturbing. The poor lodging districts and the city's anatomy schools existed within the same urban world, linked by people carrying bodies for payment. At Surgeon Square, Robert Knox ran a successful private anatomy school. Burke and Hare delivered cadavers to Knox or his assistants, who paid for them. There is no basis for saying Knox was proved to know the bodies were murder victims. He was never charged, but his failure to question their origin more rigorously destroyed his reputation. For the killers, the system rewarded speed. A recently dead body was useful to an anatomist, and the sellers did not need a long criminal chain once a buyer existed. For you, the same system compresses the time available to recognize danger. Once isolated and heavily intoxicated, the ability to reverse the situation falls sharply. Imagine the room again. A second man is present. Conversation has shifted. The door feels farther away. You are no longer being hosted. You are being managed. This is the point where social discomfort should become a survival signal. You do not need proof of a crime to decide that you want the door open and your belongings in your hands. The most useful action is early exit, not heroic resistance. Leave while you can still stand, think clearly, and move through the stair and close without being physically controlled. If a host pressures you to keep drinking, blocks your departure, separates you from your possessions, or insists that you stay despite clear refusal, the pattern matters more than any single excuse. A public alehouse, a busy inn, a watchman, a shopkeeper, or even another known lodging can offer something the private room does not: witnesses and social friction against disappearance. Remember that the historical victims did not have your knowledge of the case. They were not failing a test. They were living inside ordinary social conditions before the pattern was publicly understood. That matters because hindsight can create a false sense of superiority. The real lesson is how quickly normal trust becomes dangerous when one side knows the true stakes and the other does not. Physically, suffocation becomes disabling because the brain depends continuously on oxygen. Confusion, weakness, and loss of consciousness can arrive before a trapped person has time to understand what is happening. Add alcohol and more than one attacker, and the imbalance becomes extreme. The window for meaningful resistance is much earlier than the final physical struggle. That is why the best survival decision is boring. Stay capable of leaving. Keep your mobility, your awareness, and some connection to the public world outside the room. The murder series continued until the final victim, Margaret Docherty, was discovered by other residents before her body could simply disappear without questions. Even then, the body was moved to Knox's dissecting rooms. Police later found it there, tying the private lodging house crime to the anatomy supply chain. The case broke open because people compared stories, found a body, and involved authorities. Secrecy failed when the victim could no longer be made invisible. Hare eventually gave evidence for the Crown. Burke was convicted of murder, hanged in January 1829, and, with grim historical irony, his own body was publicly dissected. Knox was not prosecuted, but public anger and professional pressure followed him. The scandal exposed how badly the system for obtaining anatomical bodies had broken down. For years later, the Anatomy Act of 1832 expanded lawful access to bodies for medical study and was intended to reduce dependence on grave robbing and illicit supply. The law changed the system, but it cannot change what makes this case so disturbing. The victims were not entering an obviously deadly environment. They were moving through the same needs people still understand today: shelter, food, drink, company, warmth, and the hope that another person is acting in good faith. If your resources were only a few coins, a little food, a coat, and one travel bundle, losing any of them could make leaving an unsafe room harder. Seen as a system, the danger connected ordinary objects: a protected grave, money changing hands, a closed carrying container, an anatomy school door, and a teaching table. In the Westport murders, those needs could be exploited because a human body had economic value to someone farther down the chain. So if you were dropped into Edinburgh in 1828, your greatest advantage would not be strength. It would be suspicion applied at the right moment, before isolation becomes captivity. You would watch for control: who chose the room, who controls the alcohol, whether you can leave, whether anyone knows where you are, and whether your refusals are respected. You would also resist the pressure to be polite when the situation becomes wrong. In survival, embarrassment is cheaper than surrendering your last independent choice. Could those rules guarantee that Burke and Hare would never reach you? No. Historical victims can be unlucky even when they make reasonable decisions. But the rules change the odds because they attack the mechanism of the crime: isolation, impairment, invisibility, and the belief that nobody will intervene quickly. The most chilling part of this case is not the anatomy room at the end. It is the ordinary doorway at the beginning, when everything still looks harmless. One step takes you from a public street into another person's controlled space. One more drink can turn uncertainty into dependence. One closed door can erase witnesses. Walking away would not feel heroic. It would look ordinary. Taking your bundle, returning to the street, and accepting inconvenience before the room became a trap. The case asks a brutal survival question: would you recognize the trap while you still had enough freedom to walk away from it? In 1828 Edinburgh, survival could depend on recognizing danger while it still looked exactly like hospitality.